Does he understand that if the minister named in this document turns out to be him, Albertans will know with certainty that he was the one that ordered the gun seizures and that his Trudeau-inspired and PC-endorsed Liberal agenda will be uncovered?
I'd like to indicate that perhaps this member should be doing better research as an MLA and stop practicing law as a criminal defense attorney.
Well, a little heated exchange in the Alberta legislature with respect to the Alberta gun grab. Hello, everyone. I'm Adrienne Batra. Thank you very much for staying with us here at Sun News as we continue with the straight talk. And as our Sun News viewers, you certainly know that the Alberta gun grab is one of the biggest stories that has happened in our country in a very long time. Now, there has been some new suggestions and some assertions that the Alberta government was aware of what the RCMP and their actions were going to be during the flood in High River last year. Let's bring in our Sun News contributor, Solomon Friedman. He's, of course, an attorney and knows a thing or two about this particular issue. Solomon, good to see you again.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so what is the latest that we know with respect to what the Alberta PCs apparently knew on the gun grab?
Well, first of all, I find it interesting that the phrase criminal defense lawyer is now being used as an insult in the Alberta legislature. I won't take that personally.
You don't take it personally. I mean, lawyers have to put up with a lot, but okay, we'll just leave that one.
What we've had, and this has been coming out sort of in dribs and drabs from various documents that were acquired by Access to Information, is notes referring to a minister. Now, a minister either having been involved in briefings and or instructions of the RCMP in High River. Now, people need to understand that although in many places in this country, the RCMP is a national police force, in Alberta, it is the provincial contract police, meaning although it's the RCMP, it's under the auspices when acting in Alberta of the Alberta government. So the question here really is, does the buck stop with the Alberta government? Was this something these RCMP officers and their commanders did on their own, which I would say is unlikely? Or do we have actual evidence now of a briefing and instructions from an Alberta governmental minister?
Okay, so of course that is the minister was responding, and he was the one that flippantly said what he did with respect to the lawyers. But Solomon, what does this mean? I mean, we know that there's this ongoing issue. We know that clearly a lot of civil liberties were thrown in the river, as it were. But what happens next?
Okay, that's a very good question. Now, in my view, and in the view of many who've been watching this, there's really only one place for this to go from here. At this point, there's been a process by the RCMP Public Complaints Commissioner dealing with the conduct of the RCMP, but that really won't uncover the truth. What's required at this point is a judicial inquiry. That is a judge sitting as a commissioner who will be able to subpoena witnesses, call evidence, and force those responsible to come testify and answer very, very important questions. And at this point, there's one really overarching question. That is, who gave the orders here, number one, and what was the order? Was there an order to search and seize firearms from law-abiding citizens? And if so, somebody's going to be accountable for giving that order to the RCMP.
Okay, well, let's bring in our Sun News contributor, Lauren Gunter, who might have an answer, too, for that one. Lauren, good to see you.
Thank you.
So Solomon put the question out there, and the issue now, of course, Alberta PCs may have had some inside knowledge. You, of course, have taken a look at this issue from beginning to end, and where it's eventually going to end. What do we do now? What do we know even further from what has been suggested in the Alberta legislature?
I'm not sure we know much of anything for certain. I mean, Solomon's quite right that I think where we need to go from here is a judicial inquiry if we want to find out who ordered what, where, why, how, all those things. This is a bit tricky. The question that was asked in the Alberta legislature yesterday sheds light on one thing that we suspected but weren't sure of, and that is there's now been a Freedom of Information request in Alberta that turns over information that the Alberta government, at least one minister, don't know who, knew before the public did that the RCMP was going house to house taking firearms. That's all we know for certain. There's basically two gun grabs here. There's the one that happened when the emergency was at its peak. For the first 4 days when the floodwaters were roaring around High River and there were still questions about whether people were trapped in their houses, Mounties were breaking down doors and going to look for survivors. If in the process of doing that they saw firearms that were improperly stored, they took them into custody. They originally used the word seized, then they got smarter politically, and they started using it, taking into possession. But that ended on the June 23rd, 24th. From the 24th until July the 10th, they would go around to houses that they had already said were clear of survivors, break down doors, and look for firearms. And that happened beginning on June the 24th. This letter that came up yesterday in the Alberta legislature is dated June the 25th. So did a minister order this? I don't know, because the second phase of the gun grab seems to have started on June the 24th. This letter that was uncovered yesterday is dated June the 25th. But the important thing about that June 25th letter is the public wasn't informed until June the 27th that the guns were being grabbed, the doors were being broken down and guns taken. So somebody in the government knew for 2 or 3 days before the public did. Whether they ordered it or not, they were saying they didn't know. Now we know they knew before we did. And so somebody in the government is going to have to answer to, how come you knew this was going on and you did nothing to try and stop it? Now, the process of a politician trying to stop the police from doing what looks to be a law enforcement operation is very tricky. Even though Alberta has the RCMP as its provincial police force, the Solicitor General, Attorney General, all in one person, can't just phone up the division commander and say, hey, stop doing it. They don't have the power to order that sort of thing. But it wasn't until after this became a public drama in late 28, 29, that Alberta Justice Minister Jonathan Dennis wrote a letter to the RCMP saying, please get over with this as quickly as you can and give the guns back.
Okay, Lauren, I want to bring Solomon back into this discussion. Solomon, you've heard Lauren's very in-depth analysis about this, because he's been covering this and did a great documentary for us here at Sun News with respect to what happened last summer. But I want to just ask you quickly in this little bit of time we have left, Solomon, with that respect to getting to the bottom of this and digging into these murky waters, is it going to be a judicial inquiry?
Well, that is really in the hands of the political masters. There are two parties here who could potentially call a judicial inquiry. The Alberta government could call one, and I would say governments usually don't want to air their own dirty laundry. That is to say, the PCs would be unlikely to call one. But because the RCMP is ultimately a federal police force, it is possible that the federal government could have jurisdiction to call a judicial inquiry. The other issue here is whether or not this ultimately will become a matter for the voters in an Alberta provincial election. That is to say, the Wild Rose Party could run on a platform, one of those planks being that they would insist on a judicial inquiry to hold the previous government responsible. But because the power to call an inquiry ultimately lies with the government, what really has to happen is to determine whether or not there'll be sufficient political pressure as a result of this story simply outraging the public, that law-abiding citizens were targeted when there was no threat to property or threat to life, and their firearms were seized for absolutely no reason. Yeah,
as if Alberta voters need any more issues against the Conservative government there. All right, gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there, but appreciate both of you joining me and giving us your expert opinions on this one. Thanks to both Lauren Gunter and Solomon Friedman.